All right, Alhamdulillah, it worked. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing the tafsir that we were doing. Let's look into what we did last time and just kind of get this reminder of all of that we talked about yesterday. So, let's see, we were doing with Tafsir al-Qurtubi and we went over a couple points. Number one, قُلْ أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ إِنْ أَتَاكُمْ عَذَابُ اللَّهِ أَوْ أَتَتْكُمُ السَّاعَةُ أغير الله تدعون إن كنتم صادقين. So it was really exposing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala previously, well, He had sent the prophets and the prophets and the messengers were telling them of the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the prophets and the reason why they were created and that they had to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they didn't take it seriously. And the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was also telling them that they have to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in worship. Okay, they have to submit in worship, and if they don't submit in worship, that they're going to be punished eventually. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, first it begins at least with proposing a question. If a punishment had come to them, whether they were going to, whether a punishment or whether the hour, of course, which is death, if it had come to them, would they invoke other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And last class, we actually pretty much had put those ayat and connected them with two things. We connected them with dua al-mas'ala and dua al-ibadah. We connected it with two things. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that there's an invocation for ibadah, for submission, kind of that it is part of our spirituality as well. Dua al-ibadah. There's a type of ubudiyah, there's a type of submission that's related to submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's related to our worship and our recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Then what comes out of that is dua il-mas'ala, the dua, the invocation that you would do to request something. So whether you're requesting for uplifting a certain calamity or an illness or whatever it is, at the end you're requesting of something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting them know through dua il-mas'ala, through if a hypothetical situation that he was asking them, in a hypothetical situation where you are encountered by calamity, you're encountered by death, what and who will you seek dua al-ibadah from? Who would you actually seek to uplift the situation, the calamity that you're in order to let them see that, well, if dua al-mas'ala, you would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then certainly your ibadah should be for Allah Almighty. Let's do it again. If your dua, if your invocation in a situation where you're encountered by a calamity, if your dua il-mas'ala would be to Allah to uplift it from you and not these idols that you understand or these people that you know don't have the power to uplift the calamity, that calamity that you're facing, then in that situation, that's to awaken the instinct that instinct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put within them. What is that instinct? It's basically the fitrah. To awaken that within them and let them know, well, that fitrah that is within you, that instinct that is within you, that recognized that the only one that you would seek invocation from, or at least that answer to the call, to your call from, is Allah, then what you should get the inference from out of that is that you should submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that ibadah, in that worship, in that belief. So those two come together. So yesterday's class, we were basically going in dua al-ibadah and dua al-mas'ala and how they're related to one another. Then we went into speaking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may squeeze us in tight situations in order to provoke this dua al-mas'ala out of us, in order to help us find that ibadah. So provoke us in tight situations where we would, let's call it, you're triggering that area where you're feeling the calamity, triggering that area in order for us to invoke Allah Almighty in hope. And that's why it said right here, where's that word? لعلهم يتضرعون, in hope that they would actually get to dua al-ibadah, that they would get to recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that they should worship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may put us in tight situations. Tight situations may look like poverty, may look like economical instability, may look like different calamities, physical calamity, illnesses, may look like social situations just not working out with you, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may put you in tight situations in order for you to make dua. So is that exclusive to disbelievers? It's actually the general law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually put in this world for believers and also for disbelievers. So even your own personal life as a Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may put you in hard situations in order for you to do dua al-mas'ala, in order to improve your ibadah. Yes, ma'am. What about the disbelievers? Same exact paradigm. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us right there, أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمَمٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ, the nations before you. Why telling us the nations before us? That's in order to tell us that the nations before or the nations after, that's to tell us that this is the perpetual paradigm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would rule, and basically the standard that rules the whole world in, whether the past or the present or the future. The law is the same. The system, the paradigm is the same. You may be narrowed down to a hardship in order to provoke and trigger within you dua al-mas'ala, to make that dua. But a salih person embraces the hardship in a different way than a person that is not salih. A salih person might actually embrace it as إن الله إذا أحب المؤمن ابتلاه, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he likes a servant, he would basically make certain narrowed down lifestyle, narrows him in certain type positions. Why? Because he wanted him to let go of all the different things that are distracting this person, and wants him to go through dua al-ibadah, to only seek that submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not let anyone be his or her place of salvation. The only place of salvation for you is none other but Allah Almighty. None other but Allah Almighty. So therefore, for al-mu'min or for al-kafir, the law is the same. It's just the Muslim would, in response to the calamity, they would look at the situation differently. They would turn to Allah Almighty, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. But for the disbeliever, they would run away even further from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's continue. فَلَوْلَا إِذْ جَاءَهُمْ بَأْسُنَا تَضَرَّعُوا. If they had obeyed, if they had actually submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they had held on to dua al-mas'ala, then the situation was supposed to be dragging them and letting them find the place of dua al-ibadah. They did get their dua answered, but did they actually still find dua, that ibadah place? The answer is not everyone would actually get the paradigm and get the picture. Some, they will get their prayer answered, but then they get further into the distraction. They would live the same lifestyle that they had lived before. Lesson not learned. Lesson not learned. Some, they would not learn the lesson. Others would learn the lesson. But ولكن قست قلوبهم. But for those that basically did not learn the lesson, even though their prayer was answered, but their hearts were hardened. They lived still a lifestyle. فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ. They lived a lifestyle, basically pacified themselves away from prayer, اتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ, and followed their own desires. And then فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا. What happened? Well, the shaitan then comes in. زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ. What was happening there? A shaitan comes in to basically create a narrative, to make their actions, to make their choices, to make their lifestyle, to make their culture, to make everything that is founding their life system. Basically, shaitan comes in to create a narrative that it's basically the path to their success. They just have to keep going. They didn't recognize that when they were narrowed down, that was that signal, that sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving them to let them recognize that the path that you're going through, that your path, the lifestyle, the system is basically distancing you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَمَّا نَسُوا مَا ذُكِّرُوا بِهِ. What happened? When they had forgone everything, shayateen basically continued to give them their narratives that their philosophy, their idea is still right, and they're on the right path, they're going to get to their successes, keep going. They did indeed keep going. But and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do istidraj, will test them even further. They will get what they had tried to cultivate, what they had tried to work towards. They will get أبواب كل شيء, the doors of everything, opening the doors again, whether it's economy improving, probably more wealth, and then probably bigger economy, and certainly maybe even getting stronger and stronger in their imperialism, and the list goes on and on. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says everything's open to them, but just when they would think that they are right now the power that would never be defeated, that's when they would be living in that farah, in that arrogance. They would be living in that batar. They would be living in all this entertainment. Their life would be in search of entertainment and not in search of meaning. Search of entertainment and not meaning. There's a meaning that you would search on the inside, which is guidance. But what they were searching for is more and more matter, more and more of materialistic things and entertainment, and trying to feed their own nafs, and then أخذناهم بغتة. Then they would be suddenly taken when they had least expected it, and then فإذا هم مبلسون. Then they get into facing nothing but a complete failure. Just when they had thought that they had found the keys to success, the keys to victory, that's when they would recognize that everything basically turned upside down, and then they would get into this complete depression, and then it's like hitting against a wall. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I want you to look at this one, this is really scary. قُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ. What is dabir? So when you say dabir, it basically is talking about the nations that had come after. Because when you say dubur shay, it's basically the end of it, the back of it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us that those nations, those people that had at one point shown that they were understanding and figuring out the keys to prosperity, to victory. All of a sudden, they were taken suddenly. And then not only that, so it didn't just bring an ending to probably the prosperity, their money, their social status, everything was working just fine. But أخذناهم بغتة, everything was taken as if they did not exist. And that's why the ayah says, فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا. Now it brought an end to everything, not that is at the forefront only, but even the end of it. In other words, it had no life to ever continuing on the path that existed before. Daburul Qawm, everything was ended. What does that look like? What does that look like? Let's talk about different nations that had come before. You would talk about, for example, the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire was definitely an empire that not only in philosophy and science and archaeology, in what's it called, in architecture, and the archaeology tells us a lot about the civilization that they had built. Well, not only that, you had, what is that, Alexander the Great, and of course, and we're speaking about military power as well. We're talking about one, science, we're speaking about technology, in other words, something like technology, because even the ability to build this type of civilization was definitely telling us one of the greatest nations, one of the greatest civilizations. Let's look at the pharaohs. So, one of the greatest civilizations as well. They had medicine. In what we learn from Egyptology, we learn that there was science, there was medicine, there was astronomy, astrology, and there was a lot that they had learned about space. There was a lot that they had learned about chemistry. They had learned about agriculture. There was so much that they had learned that until the time of today were unearthing a lot of these secrets, and still were not finished to unearthing what these people had known about the world and what they had learned and what they had managed to create in terms of civilization. But then Dabirul Qawm, where is the legacy of the pharaohs? Where is the legacy of the Greek? Where's, let's go for other nations, the Aztecs and the Maya and the Aztecs and all of those you would see in Peru, or you would see in South America. They had a civilization for sure. But what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا. Those that had ظلموا, that had transgressed the limit. The word ظلم actually means to oppress. So the person that oppresses, we usually narrow it to social oppression. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that no, depression actually goes in different angles, injustice goes in different angles. If they did not recognize the nucleus of what actually helps them understand al-ibadah, And even when they didn't recognize, when they were narrowed down through the system of letting them make and be narrowed down to doing that invocation of al-mas'ala, but they still didn't get it. They still did not embrace the fitrah. They still didn't embrace the instinct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instilled within them. So what happened? They basically had continued, and then what happened? They basically ended up فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ. Those nations, they ended up basically being completely terminated. Why terminated? Because if you don't understand the nucleus of Tawheed, you don't understand Tawheed, then you don't understand all the other orbits, whether it's the preservation of life, or whether it's the preservation of mental health, or whether we're speaking about community and we're speaking about wealth and economical justice and all of that, then you're going to have everything completely confused. But then that's not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would allow to happen. He'd allow you to figure things out and would help you find certain keys, but if you still insist, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fight those that fight him. You fight Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and insist to dismantle or think of dismantling and going against the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not allow that. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them ظلم. Just by refusing to submit to the Lord Almighty's paradigm, standard, principles, and recognize that you cannot go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that you have no option but to what? But to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ. The punishment, what is the punishment? The punishment was, number one, all the things that they had at one point built, whether we're speaking about the education system, we're speaking about probably architecture, buildings, money, you name it that they had built, now everything is completely dismantled and فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا, as if they had never existed. Everything that they had built was now gone. No one would even mention them, but probably mention certain things about their history as more as a probably a lesson to learn from them. What do we and why would we mention the pharaohs? We would mention the pharaohs just so that we could remember the lesson, so we could remember what happened to these nations in order for us to see a lesson learned to move on. But is that what everybody is going to learn? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen." Wait a minute. So why Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen? Not something like فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا, and then possibly say, well, now you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Why say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen? All the praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why all the praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That they're destructed? That's something to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for? Absolutely. How? To end oppression is actually something to celebrate. Is something to celebrate. To end a system like Bashar al-Assad is definitely something to celebrate. To end a system like those oppressive regimes are something to celebrate. To end, inshallah, one day Israel is definitely something to celebrate. To end oppression is definitely something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to remember that the victory is something to celebrate, that it only can be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Why Rabbil Alameen? He didn't just say Alhamdulillah, but Rabbil Alameen. to let us know that this system, this paradigm, is basically the paradigm that is the perpetual paradigm, that ending oppression, ending shirk, ending any form of injustice is a commitment, is a law, is the paradigm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically do, whether in the past or in the future, that's going to be inevitable. There's no way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let injustice prevail. Injustice will prevail. And haqq will prevail. And truth will prevail. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mutimmun nurihi walau kariha al-kafirun, that He will let His light prevail even when the kafirin are going to be disliking it. They're going to be, even if all the nations would fight the Lord Almighty, Allah Almighty's power will prevail. And that's why He said, Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all the praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the worlds. Then, after letting us see that theme, قل أرأيتكم إن أخذ الله سمعكم وأبصاركم وختم على قلوبكم من إله غير الله يأتيكم به انظر كيف نصرف الآيات ثم هم يصطفون. It wanted to take us to the previous node. What is it saying? Let's translate that one, at least the surface translation, and then we're going to go in details. Okay, let's see. Do you see, tell or say, do you see if your Lord Almighty had taken away your hearing and your sight and had sealed your hearts, who is the Lord other than Allah Almighty would bring it back to you? See how such verses or such miracles are given to them to see in practice, basically, yet they would still turn away from it. Say, if the torments of the Lord Almighty had come to you suddenly or openly, we'll talk about the difference between this one and this one later. Is it only the oppressors? Are they the only ones that would be getting distracted? Or just recognize all the messengers and all the prophets, when they were sent, we would only send the prophets and the messengers to bring glad tidings and to bring warning. So whoever believes and does what is righteous, then they would be the ones that would not encounter fear and they would not encounter sorrow. And for those that would deny our verses, they would be the ones to be pricked by the torments and the pain for what they had committed in doing fisq. What is fisq? We'll talk about it again as a reminder. Fisq is basically committing a sin, or is it more? قُلْ لَا أَقُولُ لَكُمْ عِنْدِي خَزَائِنُ اللَّهِ. The inference, the supposed question, well, if you basically control, or if you're related to the Lord Almighty and you're capable of basically making a life with no fear and no sorrow, then why aren't you living it now? So the answer is, say, I don't tell you that I own the treasures and the keys to the treasures of the Lord Almighty. And I do not know the unseen and the future. And I'm not claiming to be an angel. I would just follow what was revealed unto me. Yet, Is the person that is blind equal to the person that is capable of seeing? Do you not think and ponder in that? But warn those that would fear a day of getting into that resurrection to their Lord Almighty, when they would have no authority, no power, no support, and no intercession but through the Lord Almighty. For perhaps that may lead them to finding religious integrity. Do not turn away those that would invoke their Lord Almighty throughout the day and throughout the night, seeking the face of their Lord Almighty. You would not be capable of holding them accountable, and you would not be the one to be in judgment over them and then kick them out or return them. And then you would be an oppressor if you had done so. وكذلك فتنا بعضهم ببعض ليقولوا أهؤلاء من الله عليهم من بيننا أليس الله بأعلم بالشاكرين. Then they would see a trial. They would get a narrative that would confuse them. And they would say, those are the poor ones. How on earth did you think the poor ones are in any way in a better status than the status that we're in? The disbelievers will say. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is noting this claim and this narrative that they would think that the social status, the economical status is reflecting nothing but consent from Allah, that they're actually in a better place. So he's noting that they would say, are those poor ones, the ones in faith, that is, are those poor ones actually better than us in somehow thinking that the poverty that the poor Muslims were living in, that they were somehow reflecting nothing but the Lord Almighty, basically not accepting and not embracing them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَعْلَمْ بِالشَّاكِرِينَ. Doesn't the Lord Almighty really know who the ones that think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really are? But then if those that would believe in the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tell them salamun alaykum, tell them peace be upon you, what are they facing? Well, they were the ones that the disbelievers were mocking. Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself was wanting to, I guess, prioritize the chieftains and prioritize the upper class somehow for da'wah at one point. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling him, no, don't kick those away and don't turn your face away from these people, because those are actually at a better place. So tell them, peace be upon you. Your Lord Almighty had ordained upon himself mercy for whoever does good in wrong, in jahala, while they were in a situation of ignorance. Then they would repent to the Lord Almighty and do what is good after it, for the Lord Almighty is all forgiving and all merciful. Yet we were laying out the ayat. وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ. And this is how we would lay out those different verses in order for people to recognize وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ. In order for the people to recognize, to bring clarity, to scrutinize, to see the paradigm of how the path of those that would be mujrimeen, those that would be considered as criminals. In other words, what? It's in order for us to recognize the definition of what makes a crime and what makes piety, how to recognize the signs of piety and the signs of crime, how to recognize the definition of piety and the definition of crime, and how to recognize the fate of piety and the fate of crime, because we can be confused in understanding those paths and thinking that if a person is living perhaps maybe wealth available, or perhaps maybe the keys to what people would consider as the path to success, it probably was available to them. And then we would think, well, they managed to get it right. But then we don't many times see down the road where this is going. Any path, whether it's the path of wealth, or whether it's the path of some kind of fame, or some kind of a social status or political power, whatever it is, if it does not lead to the pattern, to the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's a path of dhulm. That's a path of istidraj. That's a path of test. You gotta be careful. And if it's a path that leads to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then one has to recognize that in the beginning you may be encountering a struggle, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after the struggle, things will become easy for you. But that doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is accepting it. It could be the test going in stage 2, and then أخذناهم بغتة. So what should I do? قل إني نهيت أن أعبد الذين تدعون من دون الله قل لا أتبع أهواءكم. What should we do? Tell them and say, O Prophet Muhammad, tell them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell them, I was forbidden from worshipping other than تدعون من دون الله, other than what you were claiming, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is that supposed to say? تدعون can be can mean to invoke. Now we're going back to what? Here the Prophet said, an a'bud. Now this is in order to bring in, again, this dua il-mas'ala and dua il-ibadah again. Now this ayah is again putting it in one ayah, telling us, O Prophet, tell them, I was forbidden to worship other than Allah Almighty, that is, and forbidden to worship what you invoke other than Allah Almighty. Telling us that when you do dua il-mas'ala, that's in order to trigger within you the ibadah. And that's why we would read in Surah Al-Fatiha every day and many times per day, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. It is you that we worship. It is you that we seek refuge in. قُلْ لَا أَتَّبِعُ أَهْوَاءَكُمْ. Say, I will not follow your whims and your desires. Why? Because their whims and the desires were basically what Shaitan was doing in terms of creating the narrative to let them think that زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ, the narrative that everything that they were doing was basically going the right direction. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet ﷺ that yes, not do you only want to look at dua al-ibadah and dua al-mas'ala. So you said إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Then you're going to say اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, and اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, that's قُلْ لَا أَتَّبِعُ أَهْوَاءَكُمْ. When you say اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, so okay, you figured out إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Good, that's a basis. But that's not enough. That's why you would continue. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Guide us to the right path. Which path? The path of those. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. Those of the path of those that you had blessed. Blessed with what? Blessed with faith. Blessed with guidance. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, and not the path of those غير المغضوب عليهم, and not the path of those that you were not content over. ولا الضالين. Who are الضالين? الضالين are basically the ones that may have had certain notes of truth, but then they confused the narrative or they had confused the details. They had some glimpse of truth, but then a lot of this truth was confused with the wrong interpretation. So what were they? ضالين. They were misguided. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَا أَتَّبِعُ أَهْوَاءَكُمْ, meaning I tell them, I will not follow your whims and desires. Why? Because I'm doing اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. قد ضللت إذا. Look at that. Connected with Surah Al-Fatiha. قد ضللت إذا وما أنا من المهتدين. Because if I were to follow your whims, your desires, or probably all those cultures, philosophies that you had presented as smart, what happens? Well, قد ضللت إذا. Yeah, I may have some glimpse of truth, but the glimpse of truth, just as the Italian proverb says, the worst of the lies are basically the lies that contain some truth within them. Why? Because it makes it harder to spot. When you have truth mixed with lies, it makes it hard to spot. And the worst of the scams are basically those scams that you would find some in it, some truth within it, and then you're confused because this person is coming in as a person that really cares, a person that's trying to help you. And then that's the worst of the scams. The worst of the scammers are basically the ones that come disguised in faith, disguised in mercy. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, say it. قَدْ ضَلَلْتُ إِذًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُهْتَدِينَ. If I were to follow your whims, if I were to follow your culture that's basically centered around your whims and centered around shirk, then I would be going the right path, the wrong path if I were to do so. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُهْتَدِينَ. And I wouldn't be amongst the ones that are guided. So speak in pride of faith. قل إني على بينة من ربي وكذبتم به. I'm the one that's basically on the right spot. I'm basically the one that figured out and basically was given the bayina, given all the different evidences to basically help people find guidance. And you're the one that denied it. ما عندي ما تستعجلون به. I don't have what you're rushing for. You're rushing for perhaps. Yeah, bring the destruction that you're talking about. Show us what that looks like. Said, I don't actually have that power. But in al-hukmu illa lillah. The judgment is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He would basically let you know right there, يقص الحق. He would basically tell you the truth. He would basically inform you of the truth. And at the end, the Lord Almighty would be the one to make the distinction between truth and falsehood. He would bring eventually the distinction to giving truth victory and falsehood an ending. And قل لو أن عندي ما تستعجلون به لقضي الأمر بيني وبينكم والله أعلم بالظالمين. Tell them, if I had what you are rushing for, which is you wanted the destruction, right? Well, I don't have that. And if you wanted probably more and more wealth, then everything would basically become useless to bring you the test to you. In other words, that would end the test. But you're being tested, and Wallahu a'lam bil-zalimin. And the Lord Almighty is the one that knows who the real oppressors are, but you just gotta know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending you a message to warn you, to bring you glad tidings if you choose to take it. As a prophet and a messenger, I don't have the power not to bring you wealth, and I don't have the power to bring destruction if that's what you want. And that's why وعنده مفاتح الغيب. He's the one that has the keys to the unseen, the keys to the provision, the keys to all the powers. لا يعلمها إلا هو. No one knows it but he. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. And he knows what is on land and what is on sea. And in fact, in every single leaf that would fall, or even a seed that is in a dark area, in a dark land on earth, or even something that is ratb, something that is moist, or even something that is hard, all of that is written in a book that the Lord Almighty had basically left in a Lawh al-Mahfuz, and it's in a clear book that there's no way that you can run away from the Lord Almighty's knowledge. وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ. You want evidence? Well, he's the one that puts you to death, or a pseudo death throughout the night. And he would know throughout the day what type of transgression, what type of action, what you had committed throughout the day. But then that isn't the end of life. ثُمَّ يَبْعَثُكُمْ فِيهِ. Then you're going to be resurrected. We're just laying out the different timeline of what your life would look like for you to prepare for it. لِيُقْضَى أَجَلٌ مُسَمَّى. For you to know that there is an ordain, that there is a reason, a purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically set as an appointed day, and then you would return to the Lord Almighty, and He would inform you of all that you had committed. Why? وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. For He is the one beyond His servants, above His servants, and He would send the angels that are basically hafaza. They would be the ones that would be given the power, they would be given basically the trust to come to you, and then they would be the ones to bring death to you. And then those angels, they would not let go. Once they get the order, they would not let go, and they would not whatsoever give you your life back. And that's for you to learn that there is a purpose, and that you don't control life, neither do you control death. If you don't control life, then you don't control death. Then recognize ثُمَّ رُدُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ مَوْلَاهُمُ الْحَقِّ. Then recognize that they would be returned to the Lord Almighty. That is the true Lord Almighty. أَلَا لَهُ الْحُكْمُ. Isn't Now that you recognize that إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, now you recognize that He is the one that has the hukum, that has the authority, that has the power, and therefore the Lord Almighty is أسرع الحاسبين. He's the fastest in basically holding people accountable, and He would be the one that we should be turning to. So recognize it. قُلْ مَن يُنَجِّيكُمْ. Who's the one that's going to be saving you from all of these, whether it's the ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ, or whether it's the darkness on land, or whether it's the darkness on sea? You would invoke your Lord Almighty تَضَرُّعًا, in deep sincerity, and even in silence. If the Lord Almighty had saved us from this, we would be all thankful. Tell them your Lord Almighty is the one that would save you from it and every calamity, but then you would continue in associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is capable of bringing the resurrection upon you, or even the torments above you, or even underneath you, or even create divisions amongst you, and then let you face the torments or the different divisions, whether it's wars and injustices upon one of you. Therefore, see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power unfolding. Yet, will they understand and see Allah's power in all of that unfolds that is around them? But your nations would deny, even though it is the truth. Tell them that you are not. Tell them you are not the one in control of everything. قُلْ لَسْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ بِوَكِيلٍ. I'm not the one that is your guardian. You're the one that's supposed to be responsible. Recognize there is one theme. لِكُلِّ نَبَإٍ مُسْتَقَرٍ وَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. Every one of those, one of those pieces of information that I basically had received is basically going to be something that will unfold right before your eyes, and you will see it till you know that it's the truth. But if you still turn away, then إذا رأيت الذين يخوضون في آياتنا فأعرض عنهم. But if you see those that would basically just engage in probably mocking the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or perhaps denying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you had done your job. فأعرض عنهم. Just turn away until they would change the subject. In other words, don't expose yourself to their words or to their lifestyle, especially now that it's so easy to see it on social media. And then without you realizing, you would get normalized with this rhetoric, you would normalize with this lifestyle, you would normalize with all of this shirk or kufr or dalal. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَعْرِضَ عَنْهُمْ. You have to find a different path, find a different group. So then, therefore, you got to turn away from this lifestyle. And وَإِمَّا يُنْسِيَنَّكَ الشَّيْطَانِ. In situations when a shaitan might pacify you away from dhikr, فلا تقعد بعد الذكرى مع القوم الظالمين. You made the mistake and you sat with the wrong group at one point and you kind of got pacified away. Then now you know that shaitan has these different ways that he can drag you into the wrong area. فلا تقعد بعد الذكرى. After this reminder, don't sit with these kind of people. Don't expose yourself to these kind of people, because they have the power to drag you into their corner. Your brain was actually created to flock with the things, and you have the ability to adjust and in compromise a lot in order to fit in. It's part of your nature. But then you got to be careful, because this nature can sometimes be tricky, because it can put your faith into this type of a slippery slope. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تَقْعُدْ بَعْدَ الذِّكْرَى. Next time, don't sit after this reminder مع القوم الظالمين. Why? وما على الذين يتقون من حسابهم من شيء ولكن ذكرى لعلهم يتقون. At the end, they don't want to answer this call. They don't want to do it. At the end, all you need to do is just give them a reminder, for hopefully that will trigger in them perhaps let's call it the receptor of figuring out and finding religious integrity. Now, of course, I can go on and on with those, but then I don't want to go too much further away. All right, we really went off, all right, too far. But inshallah, what we're gonna do, we actually did, how many pages did we do right now? 1, 2, 3. Yes, 3. And we were going to begin the 4th one, but then I remembered that no, don't go too far. Okay, let's see. Now we're going to get to فقطع دابر القوم الذين ظلموا with تفسير القرطبي. فقطع دابر القوم الذين ظلموا والحمد لله رب العالمين. And let's look into now the detailed words. There's so much to say. فقطع دابر القوم. What is it, دابر? دبر القوم. If we're speaking about the end of the end of whatever is coming. So what if we're talking about, let's say, a queue, dabar al-qawm would be the last person in that queue. Okay, the last person in that queue would basically be what would basically be dabar al-qawm. There is a hadith that uses the same word. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Who's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud again? It's that Sahabi that was the sixth to become Muslim. He was really short, really tiny in his physique, okay. But the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned that only even his heel is going to be bigger and heavier than the mountain of Uhud. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, من الناس من لا يأتي الصلاة إلا دبرية. Some people would only come to prayer at the end. In other words, they're always late. They're always late for salah. And those basically, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. So in other words, we have to, whenever it's a good thing, we always have to be on time. Let's see. So what does it mean فَقُطِعَ دَابِرُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا? Here he says that actually means their offspring was basically brought to an end, terminated. Wait, so what does it mean their offspring was terminated? Their reproduction, like they became infertile or something? No, it doesn't mean that they had become infertile. It means the legacy, it can mean one, the legacy that they had basically built, it became history. And it can mean that those that would embrace that legacy, they basically let go of it. In other words, they let go of it, and therefore uh, that relationship between the ancestors of those people, in other words, the new generations, they basically disregarded the legacy of their ancestors, and that was the end of the end of all that they had built. Because every single person, when you teach your child about different things about life and all of that, you want to pass on a certain legacy to your children. And you would hope that your children would also continue this legacy, okay, and pass it on to their children. And that legacy would be whether it's the legacy of faith or the legacy of probably maybe success or the legacy. Of course, it's part of our nature that we would want to be known throughout history. And, of course, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically tell us that the legacy that will remain is the legacy of piety, is the legacy of truth. That's the legacy that will remain. You start wondering, like you look at some of the scholars, like in Nawawi. In Nawawi, al-Bukhari, especially these two. I mean, there are many others, but in Nawawi, I guess is Ibn Taymiyyah as well, but in Nawawi is one of those scholars that number one never got married, lived until the age of 45. That's my age. Okay. And his book is the most printed book after the Quran. After the Quran, there's no printed book printed in those numbers more than Riyadh al-Salihin. That's a no. You start wondering, what is it that, that let his legacy. And by the way, like Riyadh al-Salihin and the 42 Nawawi hadith, okay, um, those weren't uh his findings. No, they were just his selection, really. It wasn't something that he had found or he had searched, kind of like al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari, no, he actually traveled to dig for those ahadith. But in Nawawi, no, he didn't really travel to dig for those ahadith. He didn't travel. He just selected them and just basically considered those selected ahadith are basically the fruit, or let's call it the best of things to learn about Islam. And 42 ahadith, and you had Riyadh al-Salihin, basically those selected ahadith as well. And but those were the hadith. His selection was definitely based on an inspiration, a deep inspiration. In Nawawi is one of those scholars that not only in ilm, but even in his lifestyle, lived a very humble lifestyle. Believe it or not, even though he was living in Syria, so he was living mainly, it's going to be um, close to Dar'a, so we're speaking about the southern part of Syria, okay? And he was living in that area, and uh, watermelon, and definitely it's going to be a hot area. But watermelon would basically be what would cool the person, especially during the summer. But he would not eat watermelon. He would not eat cucumbers because he felt that that was going to distract him from focusing on his studies. I'm not telling you to be utopian, but okay, I'm just noting that, noting the amount of investment that he had invested in order to live for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was wanting to put in the ilm and the amount of ilm that he was studying in. So it would be from Fajr. So we're not talking about a halaqah for an hour and two. No, 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 no. We're speaking about from Fajr all the way till Isha. Okay, those would be the classes. Those would be the classes. So it's, and barely eating in between. Barely eating in between. It would be a class in fiqh, a class in tafsir, a class in lugha arabiya, a class in usul, back to back. Just imagine, back to back, and for many years. And then he would then use that time in order to write books in fiqh, just like write books in fiqh or write books in hadith, just like the sharh in Nawawi on Sahih Muslim, for example, or even al-fiqh. Well, he wanted to do al-fiqh, wanted to do al-majmu' al-Nawawi, but he died in the middle on the chapter of zakah. Didn't even complete it. But he had many other books that he did complete. So just, yeah, just I know I kind of took you off track, but that's okay, inshallah. Yeah, it's nice when you're the one to, you know, reward yourself even when you do something wrong, right? All right. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All the praise is due to the Lord of the people. Is it al-Alameen meaning people? Or is it al-Alameen? So this is actually called Sighat Muntaha al-Jumu'ah, right? And this is basically called this. So one is alam, but in itself, that's actually plural. You know, people, that's a plural word anyways. Okay. But in Lugha Arabiya, alam in itself is plural. But when you say alameen, and now you're making it into Jami' Mudhakkar Salim right there, and this becomes right there, alameen. peoples or nations. Okay, so alam upon alam, a nation upon a nation, a nation upon a nation. So if he is the Lord of nations, what nations are we talking about? Are we talking about a nation of human beings? Are we talking about nation of plants? Are we talking about nation of animals? What kingdoms are we talking about? Animal kingdom, planet kingdom, plant kingdom? Are we talking about, did I say planet? Plant? Um, what nations are we talking about? So it can actually include all nations. It can include nations in terms of people. It could also include different kingdoms as well. At the end, that the Lord Almighty, in his praise, is what basically will always last. It will go beyond all. All right. And that's basically to do what? That's to teach the believers how to thank the Lord Almighty whenever they are encountered with victory, and how to leave to oppression, and to leave all the different paths that don't lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is basically one thing that we should always keep in mind of those different paths, because if we lose our patterns, we lose our paths, then we're going to be getting into that misguidance, and we can be facing the ending of القوم الذين ظلموا. Once we confuse our paths, then we're in trouble. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us that if you want your legacy to continue, the true legacy that will continue is the legacy of truth. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ إِنْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ سَمْعَكُمْ وَأَبْصَارَكُمْ وَخَتَمَ عَلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ مَنْ إِلَهٌ غَيْرُ اللَّهِ يَأْتِيكُمْ بِهِ. And tell them, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken your hearing and your sight and sealed your hearts, who's the Lord that's going to bring it back to you? See how the Lord Almighty exposes, exposes, nusarrif. We'll talk about that in just a bit. Okay, let's look at one word at a time. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ. Now, what do we see right there? Notice that how many quls. Maybe we should do how many quls are in Surah, in Surah in Surah Al-An'am, right? Let's look that up. So can somebody look it up? Just see how many quls are in Surah Al-An'am. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go really quick. I just looked it up right now. Okay, so let's see. In Surah Al-An'am, oh boy. 1, 2, 3, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Oh boy. Somebody, you guys counted, because it's definitely looking like it's almost 40 or something. Is it? I think it's giving me like almost 40 or 64 or something. I don't know. Somebody count them for me. Okay, so we got a lot. It's definitely a lot more than I thought. I think it's the most surah that has quls. I'm looking over the different surahs, and I think it's the most surah that has qul. No, I don't think so. Yes, it is. It's the most surah that has qul. Ever wonder why? Because it's a debate with the disbelievers. All the other surahs have less qul. It's the most surah that has qul. What comes out of qul? The word qul, which is this one, the word qul means say. What comes out of it? What comes out of the word qul, one, is that you're being the instructor. In other words, you're coming from a high position, and you're being the instructor to those disbelievers, that is Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're the one that's basically going to inform them. You're going to instruct them. You're going to tell them about the truth, and therefore do not let them be the ones to go up above. Because if you're the instructor that means you're not taking their words from a higher end, but you're letting them recognize the position that they are living in. You're letting them recognize how low their words are. You're letting them recognize the lowness of their status, the lowness of their words. You're letting them recognize how their words contain all these discrepancies and how their words are contradictory and how their words are really just arrogant, but they're actually empty of meaning and empty of value. But your words with qul, they're basically full of that meaning, full of the clarity, and that they contain the light, and therefore recognizing that you as a believer stand and speak the words of da'wah with pride. We're not talking about the pride to mean arrogance, but we're talking about the pride to be confident. Okay? So there's a difference. We're not talking about arrogance here. We're talking about pride of faith. We're talking about pride to mean confident. We're speaking about pride to mean with power. Sorry about that. Okay. And then let's see what he said here. Al-Qurtubi wanted to say that there is an inference here, and that's why he said جواب إن محذوف. So قل أرأيتم إن أخذ الله سمعكم وأبصاركم. If the Lord Almighty had taken your hearing and your seeing, he said that there's one thing that was omitted, which is, okay, well, who's going to bring it back? He said, well, the inference is the answer to this. It's that he's asking them the question. He's asking them the question, if the Lord Almighty had taken your hearing and taken your sight and basically sealed your hearts, who's the other Lord that's going to bring you all of this? Did he answer the question? Well, he didn't answer the question directly, but he was letting them answer the question, because the answer to the question, they know the answer. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was putting those hypothetical questions, hypothetical situations, in order for them to ponder in the answer themselves that they would already know the answer to. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let them know through provoking and letting them see through, of course, the different senses that they would usually regard as the most important senses to finding truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, well, what about those senses? Since you consider that those tools are important, which they are, and you recognize these tools, if those tools are taken away from you, who's the one that's going to be capable of giving it back to you? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would speak to them by triggering their sensation with the things that they would know. It's kind of like hands-on. It's like a hands-on and letting them know. It's like, okay, now you see your eyes, you see with your eyes, you hear with your ears. If that was taken away, who would you consider that dua al-mas'ala? Well, it's God. Okay. Now that you would recognize that there is a creator that created your senses, then shouldn't that lead you to finding ibadah, the worship, to be for God Almighty? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, Man ilahum ghayrullah yatikum bih, who's the other Lord that's going to bring you the sight back, or even the hearing back. Now let's see right there. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ إن أرأيتكم, sorry, إن أتاكم عذاب الله بغتة. Again, the word قل. Now here it said قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ, and this one is قُلْ أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ إن أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ. أَرَأَيْتُمْ, is this talking about them seeing? So when you say أَرَأَيْتُمْ, if you were to see something, and this is أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ, if you basically see something? No, this isn't to see. This is to know. Okay? So أرأيتكم would basically mean to know. Do you, even though the root actually comes from ra'a, the word ra'a actually means to see. But there's a difference between visual seeing, okay, and mental seeing, kind of like an insight, okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there are different ways of seeing things. You could see something and recognize how patterns work, at least when you're seeing something hands-on. And you could also understand something, and that's that other ara'aytakum, to understand something, to ponder in something. If the torments of the Lord Almighty had come to you, baghta, if the torments of the Lord Almighty had come to you suddenly, what would you actually do? Man ilahun ghayrullah, who's the other Lord that would bring you all the different things that you had lost? Or what? I mean, sam'akum, is this man ilahun ghayrullah ya'tikum bih? What is the pronoun bih referring to? Who's the Lord that's going to bring you it? Okay. So is it referring to the loss of hearing or the loss of sight or the loss of the heart being sealed? Is this that pronoun basically referring to that? Or is the pronoun bih referring to, well, who's the Lord that's going to bring you it, referring to guidance? So those are, how did they get to guidance? They said, well, that's the inference. In other words, who would be the other Lord that would bring you the guidance to recognize how to make use in what the world that you were seeing and hearing and processing and trying to understand what it was for. So the scholars that said that bih refers to guidance, they said we basically look at it from the context. But the scholars that said that no, this is talking about that is the pronoun, it's talking about what that question that within the text was saying, sam'akum absarakum qulubikum. They said, well, the text is the pronoun is referring to their sight, their hearing, etc., and who would bring it back to them. So we would look at the text, but then the inference of the answer to this would be guidance. So I guess it's a different way of looking at it, but really the meaning is and the theme is going to be really the same. But I want you to look at this one. Notice أرأيتم, أرأيتكم, انظر. Notice how there's always this أرأيت, do you see? Do you see? There's always that emphasis on vision. انظر, انظر. And then it would, let's see, لا أقول لكم. There's always something that there's a conversation. This conversation is for people to see, for people to hear, for people to process ideas, for people to communicate, for there's definitely, and what I worry about during our time is more and more of those basically being introverted and losing their deen, becoming more common. I'm not saying that every single introverted person is losing their deen. In fact, sometimes it's important to be introverted because أعرض عن الذين أعرض عن الذين كفروا. Or sometimes أعرض عن الذين who, well, those that basically are away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes you just have to basically be away from all the fitan. So I'm not saying every single introverted person is basically living a fitna. But, one thing I would worry about it depends on the context that that person is living in. During our times, because of whether it's social media, technology, and all of that, like never before in history, we're finding more and more generations that are disconnecting themselves with people, with family, disconnecting themselves with the world around them. And that's pretty dangerous because we were not created we were not created in such a system. And that's definitely going to have an implication on our mental health, in our social, in our social dynamic. We weren't created that way, and this is becoming a lot more common, where people are isolating themselves. They don't want to get married. They don't want to associate with people. And definitely, we're seeing more say, I want to move out of my parents' house. I can't handle this. And what we're seeing is that people are becoming, one, entitled, and two, losing their ability to enhance their powers of encountering or even overcoming hardships. So every time that they would encounter a hardship, the easiest way out of it is not to solve it or basically fix it, or probably maybe figure out a way to fix the situation. The easiest way out is basically just let go and just move out, run away. It's not for you, etc. And we're seeing we're seeing the modern culture. Modern culture is basically, I would say, enhancing all of that. We're seeing that we are cultivating a lot of this narrative. Whenever we're finding a struggle dealing with people, oh, it's because they're narcissists. Whenever we're, finding a struggle with probably school or etc., school is not meant for everyone. We're struggling with our parents. Oh, it's because they're just always just wanting to be authoritative, and the list goes on and on. And then we lose the capacity to learn how to navigate people, navigate struggles, navigate the world, etc. And then we start losing principle. We start losing principle. If you were to look at every single principle stands on four main pillars: recognizing justice, enduring patience, having that satisfaction on limited things, but then, no, despite all the effort to probably get you to give up on your principle, you're still holding on. And number four, having the courage to stay firm on truth. And when people start losing their skills in that is trained even in their early childhood on how to figure out different ways to deal with the people, deal with the different things around us, etc. And we're right now like never before in history. And right now, AI is even going to be taking even more of that. We're going to start becoming more and more introverted, and then possibly becoming less human with time. What do I mean by less human? Certainly, metaphorically, I'm talking about less committed, less in principle, less in bringing in mercy, affection, love to one another, because we would just want to just enjoy our own selves because we can't handle anything that is triggering anything that we may not be comfortable with. And that's pretty dangerous, because if you're taking away the human from a human, what do they become? They just become lacking humanity, lacking affection, lacking mercy. The most important thing about a human is that bashariyah, that mercy that you would get from your mother, the affection that you would get from your mother, the responsibility that you would get from your father, etc., and the family that we were created to basically embrace. So when you see أرأيتم, أرأيتكم, انظر, etc., it's to enhance our ability to communicate. It's to enhance our ability to relate with the world around us, to enhance the ability to relate with our own senses, to basically strengthen that and recognize the world around us and not shut it down. What I worry about things like the Bluetooth that, they would have these headphones and they're listening to this music and they're just shaking themselves. And here they are, the screens are right now on their faces. They're not even looking beyond, and the headphones are blocking their ears. And now they have, what is this, AVI, or I don't know what it's called, that screen that basically covers their head. What's going to happen? What are we going to one day be controlled where we can't even hear outside of these algorithms that are basically there telling us to listen to specific things and see specific things and communicate in specific things, or be considered a fob, or be considered, if you're not talking like them, you're somehow outdated. There's something wrong with you. You have to dress in a certain way. You have to speak in a certain way. You have to, now we're seeing the Gen Z language is basically not even English. And you're like, what is that? How did you get this kind of weird language that's not even English? And they think it's funny. They think it's education. It's not education, it's miseducation. Now we're creating a new narrative. This is so scary. ثم هم يصدفون. يصدفون, يعرضون, means that they would be, here it is, ثم هم يصدفون. What happens? So this was actually provoking the disbelievers to look at their senses, to also understand that you look at these signs, and these signs are supposed to help you recognize a pattern. They're supposed to help you recognize through through these senses. You were supposed to help to they were supposed to help you find the truth. But then ثم هم يصدفون, yet later they would يصدفون. What is صدفة? صدفة can mean to encounter something. صدفة could also mean to turn away from something. صدف عن would turn away from something. So now we've got to go on compound words. And صدفة, the word صدفة meaning could also mean the shell. Okay. So when you say يصدفون, does that mean, can all that be like they were basically turning away, and when they turned away, they became like, it's like a block, like a shell type of thing? Can we actually say that? Let's just say right there, يصدفون يعرضون, that they would basically turn away. So why were they turning away anyways? Because they couldn't see any point in the the question, or even any point, even though they do recognize the answer to it, but they couldn't see the point that you were trying to lead them to, دعاء المسألة and دعاء العبادة. They couldn't figure that out anymore. What happened? Their hearts were sealed from even understanding the point that you were trying to make. I want you to look at this one. You know, it's quite strange how sometimes people need a series of miracles to understand truth, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically letting us know that it just needs one for an open heart to recognize truth. Just needs one. It just needs one. But then people with a closed heart, the receptors had dried out. You can lay out all those signs and they would still not see it. So therefore, for us, sometimes you just need to continue doing da'wah. It could be just one day, this receptor might just enlighten. Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give Noura's father and mother hidayah. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Okay. And what we're going to do in this ayah, قُلْ أَرَأَيْتَكُمْ إِنْ أَتَاكُمْ عَذَابُ اللَّهِ بَغْتَةً أَوْ جَهْرًا هَلْ يُهْلَكُ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And say, if the torments, so al-adhab is basically the torment of Allah. If it comes to you baghta, what is baghta? Baghta means suddenly. Baghta can mean suddenly and can also mean silently. And this is scary. Silently, yeah. Like, an illness can be, boom, you're stage 4 and you're like, whoa, stage 4? How did it? You had been actually going through cancer for quite a while, but you didn't recognize it until now. Subhanallah. This is baghta. All of a sudden, you just discover it right there. But it was actually silently already happening. And baghta could also mean during the night. During the night. So some adhab, نسأل الله العفو والعافية, could actually come during the night. Or jahra. Il-jahr actually means in a loud voice. But this isn't talking about necessarily a loud voice. This is talking about baghtatan aw jahra. So baghtatan silently or even in a loud situation. Like what does that mean? It can mean during the day. And that's what some scholars actually said. And some scholars actually said it isn't talking about timing per se, but it would be talking about baghtatan, silently, and jahratan, where it would be so loud and it would basically, whether making a blasting sound or something that everyone would know about. It's not a silent thing. Everyone would recognize that punishment. Okay, نسأل الله العفو والعافية. هل يهلك إلا القوم الظالمون. Well, the only ones that would be destructed are basically the ones that had transgressed from the path of the Lord Almighty. For what? هل يهلك إلا أنتم لشرككم. In other words, the inference is, well, the reason why you would be destructed is basically that they had committed the shirk. وَمَا نُرْسِلُ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. We got to stop at this one, okay? Be really scary to stop at this one. وَمَا نُرْسِلُ الْمُرْسَلِينَ إِلَّا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ فَمَنْ آمَنَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. I would love to die on an ayah like this. فَمَنْ آمَنَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. يا رب يحسن ختامنا وختامكم يا رب. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only sends al-mursaleen, the messengers, with mubashirina wa mundhirin. They would be coming in glad tidings. What does it mean to come in glad tidings? Like telling people, hey, if you were to believe, you'll be granted Jannah. If you were to believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you guidance. So that's mubashirin. In mundhirin, if you don't believe, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish you in hellfire. If you don't believe, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you live in instability and all of that. That's mundhirin. Okay? So mubashir is basically to be a person to bring mubashir would basically be bringing glad tidings. Like what? Like, for example, more provision in dunya, or perhaps the reward in the hereafter. And wait a minute. So there's another ayah, وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْقُرَىٰ آمَنُوا وَاتَّقَوْا لَفَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَرَكَاتٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Okay. What about that ayah that we did before? So here's Surah Al-A'raf, and we answered that one, but we're going to say it again. The ayah says if the people of the city, if they had believed and had religious integrity, he would open the blessings from the heavens and the earth. How is that different from this one? فتحنا عليهم أبواب كل شيء. And this one is فتحنا عليهم بركات. What's the day? Oh, hey, look at it. This is أبواب كل شيء, and this is barakat. What's the difference? So the difference is that you would see the provisions. They're basically bringing in health, for example. If we're speaking about, let's say, eating, it's bringing in health. It's a barakah. Okay. In other words, some of the wealth that you would get would basically lack the blessings. That's lacking barakah. What does it mean if it has barakah? What it means if it has barakah, it means the implication would be good. Like what? If you eat it, it would be healthy for you. If you, it's a car, it's basically used for a good reason. Okay. If it's basically maybe garments, it's used for a good reason, it would give you the best of it. Okay. In other words, it's bringing you the good implication. Okay. But if it's فتحنا عليهم أبواب كل شيء is different. Yes, they have the money, but then it's not actually bringing them happiness. This family, they've got the money, but the husband and wife are always on each other's throats. What happened? Yes, they've got the money, they've got أبواب كل شيء, but the effect of it is not bringing its fruit. Okay. So think of it as, yes, you may see a tree, it has all these fruits, but you eat it and you see that the fruit is sour. Okay. You see a fruit? Yeah, you see a fruit, but it's sour. And that's the same thing. You see a car? Yeah, there's a car, excellent car, works great, but then that car is bringing just nothing but more and more anxiety in the household. They probably have so much going on that you may not recognize it. But for a mu'min, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make that into a barakah, would make it into a blessing, would bring in more faith, it would bring in happiness, it would bring in stability, social stability, economical stability, and the list goes on and on. That's barakah. Min as-sama'. So, mundirin, they would be basically bringing warning. Okay? فَمَنْ آمَنَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And whoever is embracing faith and aslaha. What is aslaha? Aslaha, does that mean to enter in salah? Or does that mean to live in it and be consistent? It means both. Okay? To enter in piety and or to be consistent in it. Then they would be the ones that would not find fear and not find sorrow. We talked about this before. So, and that's why he said, تَقَدَّمَ الْقَوْلُ فِيهِ. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those, فَمَنْ آمَنَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this ayah be the last ayah that we would all be reciting. فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward us all, reward you all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, yarda anna wa ankum. Let's see. That's actually Elon's goal. He said there's going to come a point in time where if you don't have a chip in your head, that you'll be outcast. He's all for chips in the brain to enhance humans. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, protect us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. You know, right now, we're living at a time, Ya Rabbi, it's a very scary world. So this is it, inshallah. We'll see you all. If there are any questions or if there are any additions, mashallah, Sister Zarina, I saw the photo of you and holding those books. It was so beautiful.